wildfires. Created by a deadly weather combination of heat, drought, and wind, they can destroy everything in their path.
Go, 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 go!
These are the stories from people who work in extreme weather.
Boom.
We just lost a big window.
It was just like a bomb went off.
Holy
and nobody is coming to save you.
And the storms they'll never forget.
Wham! Crack! Bang! Bang! Bang!
Holy we're going to die.
Plus, the how and why behind the world's worst weather. Extreme weather is ravaging the planet, now more than ever before. Hotter and drier climate conditions provide the perfect fuel to literally feed the fire. Around the globe, wildfires are growing larger, more numerous, and deadlier every year.
We're looking at more wide and varied extreme events. That means potentially longer and more fearsome droughts and heat waves. And that essentially is how wildfires are born. You have a stretch of very dry conditions, throw in a few lightning strikes and wind, bingo, you have a fearsome fire.
Wildfires can also create their own weather systems. The extreme heat causes water from trees and plants to evaporate into the air. This additional moisture then creates clouds that not only look like thunderclouds, they act like them too. During a wildfire, no place is safe, not even on a lake.
From my experience as a photojournalist, I've seen many wildfires, and I've realized that they can move very violently. One of the areas that I've found to be a safe haven are lakes because of all the water, but all that changed.
For over 25 years, Greg Welch and his wife Julie have been avid hikers and kayakers. But within 24 hours of their arrival in Boundary Waters, Greg and Julie's comfortable camping trip will go up in smoke.
Greg!
Julie! A hot, dry, windy day. As Greg and Julie enter the park, they are greeted with an ominous sign.
There was actually some smoke coming across the road, and there was some ash coming down from the sky.
A park ranger flags them down and alerts them to the situation. A forest fire caused by a lightning strike has been burning for 3 weeks.
He wanted to know where we were going to make sure we were going to be safe, and he gave us some tips on areas not to go to, and basically told us that the fire was quite contained, was not moving rapidly at the time, and we should have no problems at all.
The fire is 14 miles west of their destination. From his experience with forest fires, Greg is confident the fire is at a safe enough distance.
All right, thanks a lot.
He and Julie set out, undeterred by the fire blazing far away.
We really didn't consider ourselves to be in any danger at that time. We were very much enjoying the day for what it was. It was a very warm, pleasant day, light breeze, sunny. When we left the lake in our kayaks, we just enjoyed the nice, warm day.
Thank you. Yeah, looks good.
It's a good spot, yeah.
Good.
Around 2 p.m., winds pick up and begin to gust, just as Greg and Julie spot a suitable campsite on the lake's western shore.
At that time, we were experiencing smoke coming into the area, And my wife and I thought back about when we had talked to the ranger, and it didn't give us a lot of concern because he told us that we would experience some smoke in the area. So it was not a big concern for us at the time.
Thank you, yeah.
The science of wildfires is fairly well understood. It's two real issues. You need the fuel, which is tinder dry forests, grasslands, that sort of thing, and wind is the other component. The faster the wind, the faster the fire spreads.
They set up camp, but Greg and Julie can no longer ignore the warning signs.
Like somebody's coming.
Where there's smoke, there's fire.
You know what?
We were looking at the sky, and it became more of an ominous, smoke-filled sky. So I got my camera, and I started taking pictures of the lake, of the trees, and of the sky. And when I reviewed the pictures, what I could see in the pictures was something we could not see with our eyes. And that was orange streaks kind of shooting through the sky.
You know what? I think that
That was when we decided that we actually may have a problem. We were also hearing some small noises back in the woods, and it sounded like tree branches breaking, but way off in the distance, just a little snap and then another snap. Not very quickly, but repetitively. So I told my wife I'm gonna run up to a little creek that was just north of where we were camping, and I was gonna look down that creek to see if I could get a better view of what was going on.
As he rounds the bend of the river, Greg is not prepared for what he's about to see.
What I saw was just a very surrealistic scene. The fire was everywhere.
The fire that was 14 miles west of them is now just 3/4 of a mile away.
I was pretty terrified at that moment because I very quickly realized how quick and how close the fire actually was.
Julie!
My first thought after seeing the fire was my wife.
Julie!
Julie, we gotta go. We gotta go now.
Julie! Fire's coming!
Those noises got much louder, and instead of tree branches breaking, it now sounded like trees breaking.
Julie, we gotta go!
We grabbed the last bag.
As Julie heads to the kayak,
Come on, let's go!
Greg grabs her life jacket.
You could really hear the fire coming through the woods now. It was very violent, very noisy, very dark and smoky, and very disorientating. I wasn't even sure I was going the right direction. You could definitely feel the heat, though. I brought the life jacket down to Julie and told her to go. And as soon as she left the shoreline, she disappeared into the smoke.
A raging wildfire fueled by drought, dry trees, and powerful winds picks up speed in the Minnesota wilderness. Hikers Greg and Julie Welch are surrounded.
Come on, let's go!
Their last resort is to escape onto the lake, as water is a safe place during a fire. Or is it?
As I was still standing there on land, the fire actually came over the bank behind the smoke, and it literally was blowing over my head. Trees were lighting on fire all around me, and of course I knew at that point I needed to get away from the land, so I pushed off from shore and headed out into the lake.
Julie loses sight of Greg and cries out his name.
Greg! Greg!
But the raging fire is louder than a screaming freight train.
She was very concerned about me because she's witnessed the fire coming over the shoreline into the lake area. In her mind, she had thought I may not have made it at that point. I could hear her, but she could not hear me.
Julie!
Greg!
And then as the smoke kind of lifted off the lake for a second, we could see each other. So that was a nice moment where we knew that both of us were okay.
With the forest ablaze, Greg and Julie think they will be safe on the water.
The wind that was pushing the fire was upwards of 50 miles an hour. Lots of ash in the sky, lots of soot building up in our eyes and our nostrils and our mouths. My immediate thought was asphyxiation from the smoke. It's kind of like being in a house fire without any doors to get out. Julie was in a separate kayak, and the smoke was kind of picked up off the lake for a second by the wind, and it actually blew her sideways and literally flipped her out of her kayak into the water.
Julie!
Surrounded by a sea of flames and choked by smoke, Greg tries to rescue Julie from the frigid northern lake.
Julie, drop my paddle!
But I couldn't do it because the wind was so strong, I couldn't get to her. So I jumped out of my kayak into the water to slow myself down. And in about 10 minutes' time, we were together again in the water, hanging onto the kayak. At that point, we kind of took in the scene around us, which now was just as black as midnight, full of smoke. Everything was on fire. No matter where we looked in 360 degrees around us, everything was on fire.
It's the battle of their lives. 50-mile-an-hour winds continue to feed the killer blaze.
Everything was totally engulfed in fire, so our thoughts were about staying out in the lake. But it took a lot of energy to do that because of all the waves and the wind. The water temperature was, 50 degrees. My wife was starting to shake uncontrollably. So we decided that we were going to make landfall because we were getting hypothermia. We could see a piece of land that looked like it had not been on fire. So I climbed up on top of the rock, pulled the kayak up on the rock, and as we were doing that, it started to rain. It was a very violent, strong downpour of water.
What happened next took them by surprise. As quickly as the downpour started, it stopped. Without warning, everything changed.
You very quickly realized that all the noise that was being produced by the fire that we had been experiencing for about an hour just stopped. I mean, instantly. And the smoke started to clear. The rain had actually put the fire out.
As hot air rises above a wildfire, the moisture from burned vegetation condenses into rain clouds. Rainfall from these clouds can extinguish the very fire that created them. They survived the fire, but as a cold front moves in, will they survive the night?
We decided that we needed to stay there on that land for the night. It was too late to go back from where we had started, and so we decided to make camp on that little strip of land. There was a dry bag, actually, that had rolled up on the same shoreline we were at. And in that dry bag was our only dry sleeping bag. So then we just kind of settled in and got into a dry sleeping bag. I had a camp stove that had survived the fire. So we used the stove for heat to heat our bodies back up.
Greg and Julie spend the night. They are wet. They are cold, but they live to see morning. The fire at Boundary Waters burned for 16 miles and destroyed nearly 100,000 acres.
If you're in a forest, there's no safe distance to be away from a forest fire or wildfire, and that's simply because of their unpredictability.
For Greg, who's been embedded with wildfire crews as a photojournalist, the experience gave him a new respect for the violent power of fire.
Well, I learned to be more observant of any forest fire, no matter how far it is away from me. Because of our experience in the Boundary Waters over the years, it literally saved our lives. Without that experience, we most likely would have not have survived.
Fire can create its own weather systems, and weather itself plays a crucial role in the spread of wildfires. Hot days dry out trees, and dry winds propel fire. Nowhere more so than in California, where wicked winds of the west can create monster firestorms. October 1991, Oakland Hills, California. A small forest fire, driven by high winds, begins to spread. Within minutes, it's a wild inferno, devouring the forest and threatening the lives of residents.
Wildfires are really a byproduct of a weather event. It's essentially hot, tinder dry conditions, a spark from some lightning, and then throw in some wind into the equation, and you have a wildfire.
The Oakland Hills wildfire spread so rapidly and mercilessly, it shocks everyone. Firefighters, residents, even seasoned journalists who thought they'd seen it all.
I'm a television news reporter from the San Francisco Bay Area. In over 3 decades of television reporting, I've covered earthquakes, floods, fires, but this one particular wildfire in Oakland is certainly one that I will never, ever forget.
October 20th, 1991, was meant to be one of the best days in Rob Roth's life.
Hey. Oh, thank you.
That was the due date. My wife and I were expecting our first child.
As Rob prepares for work, he's excited and anxious about the prospect of becoming a dad. He and his cameraman head out to cover a routine story, the dying stages of a minor brush fire that firefighters had all but extinguished the day before.
The weather that day in October was typical October weather in the Bay Area. It was warm, it was breezy but not overly windy. An ideal day. It was a beautiful day, actually. Nothing unusual. And in fact, it had been a relatively quiet fire season. The idea was that we would do a story that said, hey, we had this small fire yesterday, but overall, it was a pretty uneventful fire season.
Rob and his cameraman head up to the Oakland Hills, the site of yesterday's brush fire.
In and around the San Francisco and Oakland Bay Area is the combination of topography and the different air masses that influence the weather. What we've got is an area off to the east, the mountainous terrain, the Diablo Mountain chain, off to the west, the Pacific Ocean, a series of canyons and valleys that these winds flow from the Pacific down the mountain ranges. They can funnel, become stronger, down these canyons, down these valleys. And what this leads to actually is a lot of variability in the weather conditions in very short distances, what meteorologists call microclimates. So in one area, hot, dry conditions could be occurring, and yet maybe only a few miles away, much moisture and cooler conditions being influenced by the Pacific.
When we got there, there was a crew of firefighters, and they were actually wrapping up. There was no sign of any stress or pressure or anything other than this fire's out, we can clean up and go back. In fact, I did a report standing right where the fire had been. That's how safe it was to be there at that point.
Hello, I'm Rob Roth, and today we're back on the scene of a fire which began burning yesterday afternoon. Let's go have a closer look.
And then the winds kicked up. And they were swirling winds, and they were increasingly more and more powerful. All of a sudden, I noticed in the area where the firefighters had been, there was a flare-up. So what had been maybe a little brush that was still smoldering had kicked up. And as the winds kept pushing through, this flare-up got larger and larger. And I'm thinking, well, the firefighters are here. They'll know what to do. They'll be fine. They're on it. But they couldn't quite get it out, and it kept spreading, and it kept getting larger and larger. And it seemed that in a matter of just a few minutes, the whole canyon just filled up with smoke. I had never experienced the winds that I was experiencing there, in that winds generally come from one direction, but these just seemed to be swirling. They were coming from my left, from behind me, from the right. And as these winds would come, it would create more and more smoke. And so all of a sudden, our news car, which couldn't have been more than 100 feet from where we were, I couldn't see our car from the smoke.
Rob was sent to cover the story, but now he's about to become part of it. The fire is propelled by 70-mile-an-hour Diablo winds, warm gusts that blow in from deserts to the east.
These warm, dry winds come down the slopes of the Diablo mountain range right into the San Francisco Bay Area. This is particularly dangerous because it's got a lot of dry trees, grasses that would be obvious fuel for forest fire situations. Combining that with the hot, dry winds coming down from the Diablo mountain range, the Diablo winds, these can fan the flames, cause small brush fires to become much larger wildfires.
The fiery air rises, creating a swirling updraft.
When we have winds blowing, sometimes almost up to hurricane force, 70 miles an hour, 75 miles an hour, it's almost like a flamethrower or a blowtorch on these fires. The fire can spread very, very quickly. If you're not prepared, if you haven't been watching this fire, it can become a very, very dangerous situation.
As fire grows and burns vegetation, it creates its own fuel, and in turn, creates its own wind. The very definition of a firestorm.
And if that happens,
We continued to film.
off of that ridge, it can actually...
They were just coming from all directions, these winds. Smoke was filling the air. You could sort of feel this getting away from the firefighters. It just wouldn't go out, and it just kept getting larger and larger and spreading. You really couldn't see very far because of the smoke, but you could kind of tell that, you know, it was well beyond what the firefighters were able to handle. It was as if gasoline was being poured from the sky. As these winds would come in, you'd get these whoosh, this gust of flame that would just shoot up, and then a new fire would pick up. It was very scary. And I looked around and I realized that I could no longer see where the firefighters were. The situation at hand was getting worse by the second. We knew we were in trouble, and there was a certain amount of fear that was starting to build up. I was also thinking that this is impossible, that this could be happening on this day, because this was the due date for my wife's and our daughter to be born. I got overwhelmed with sadness for an instant, thinking that, you know, maybe my wife may have to sort of go through this by herself. There was fire to our right, there was fire to our left, and in front of us and up was the fire, and it was beating down on us. We're talking 2,000-degree heat. It was just its own monster. For a quick second, my photographer, Nick, and I looked at each other, and we thought, uh-oh, what do we do now?
A deadly firestorm caused by wind and its own weather system ravages the forested suburbs of Oakland Hills, California. Firefighters believe they knocked it down, but when the winds howl out of the east, it springs back to life and turns into an out-of-control inferno, trapping television reporter Rob Roth and his cameraman.
There was fire to our right, there was fire to our left, and at the same time, I was kind of being filled up with this sense of sadness. My daughter is supposed to be born on this day. What's my wife going to do? It was extremely dangerous and confusing. The fire at this point had its own weather system. It wasn't responding the way normal fires do.
When we talk about wildfires creating their own weather systems, what we're really talking about is a wildfire that has grown to a certain size, a certain proportion. Huge amounts of superheated air is rising up in the atmosphere. That warm air wants to rise. As that air is rising, it's being replaced at the surface by winds from other directions. Dry conditions coming in from the east, moisture conditions coming in from the Pacific. But as those winds meet at the base of the fire, a lot of turbulent mixing, a lot of vortices can set up. And so what we're literally talking about is the creation of a firestorm. A firestorm then is creating its own weather, its own wind system. So it's a very catastrophic situation when the wildfire grows to such a size that it can become a full-fledged firestorm.
The fire is now burning on 5 fronts.
It was like a monster out of control. The sound was just so loud, you had to shout over it. Areas that we had been in minutes before were now under siege by this fire. We weren't prepared for anything like this.
Rob and his cameraman struggle to breathe through the thick veil of smoke. A wall of fire separates Rob from his vehicle, making escape impossible. Just when he thinks there's no way out,
the fire truck came out of the smoke. The battalion chief said, "You guys better hop on." We got on and they just gunned it out of that area.
the fire has spiraled completely out of control.
These firefighters were not there to fight the fire, they were there to evacuate and get people out. That fire truck was the last vehicle that could get out. If that fire truck had not come when it did, I'm sure I wouldn't be sitting here right now. That whole area where we were was completely devastated. That area looked like a moonscape.
Rescued from the killer blaze, Rob and his cameraman are attended to by paramedics.
My photographer was complaining that his chest hurt, that he had perhaps breathed too much smoke, and so they took him just to give him some oxygen. But we still had this fire to deal with. I ended up feeling like I could, continue, the hope that, other people got out of this area. I was still able to breathe, luckily, so I went back to the station and began putting this story together.
The fire killed 25 people and wiped out nearly 3,500 homes. It was one of the deadliest fires in California's history. For Rob, memories of the Oakland firestorm are both painful and poignant.
At one point, the battalion chief, James Riley, had gone to help a woman who was in some distress up in the hills. They found his body next to her body, and it appears that they were struck by power lines that had come down. And he was killed on there, probably within several minutes of him telling us to get on the truck. He was gone. His funeral was 8 days later, and it was 8 days later that my daughter, Casey, was born, and I couldn't go to his funeral because of that. But I remember thinking just that I'm forever grateful that I was able to be there when she was born. And it was, thanks to Chief Riley and his crew. This fire had a very deep effect on me personally. It took something as deeply emotional as my baby being born to sort of get me out of the sadness that I'd been feeling about what had happened at this fire, and to Chief Riley.
The Oakland firestorm changed the way Rob covers wildfires, no matter how non-threatening they may appear.
A fire can change on a dime. This was way beyond anything that I had ever experienced before. This is definitely a day I will never forget.
Wind can spread fires, and fires can create their own weather. But what happens when it rains after a fire? Known for its location and climate, California has seen fire and it has seen rain. And unfortunately, when these weather events happen in this order, mudslides can occur, causing horrific damage. Daniel Dreyfus is a photojournalist who's traveled the world, capturing incredible stories.
I've seen some pretty extreme things in my career.
Over the past 12 years, he has witnessed destruction in all types of environments, from deserts and jungles to wildfires and urban centers.
My photos have been seen in publications throughout the world, including the New York Times, CNN, The Guardian, San Francisco Chronicle, the LA Times, and many more. As a photojournalist, I've traveled the world photographing devastation, but this was the weather event I'll never forget.
There's a number of different conditions that could create a landslide. In this situation, it's a combination of you have very steep slopes because it's a fault line where the land is actually rising, and then we had a severe fire that removed the vegetation, which made the hill more susceptible to a landslide.
December 4th, 2017, Santa Barbara, California. Daniel receives a call from his editor.
It was about 5 a.m. I picked up the phone. All she said was, "Ventura's on fire, go now." As a photojournalist, if you're covering a fire, you need to have the proper fire gear. So you need to have everything a firefighter has, pretty much. So I quickly grabbed my fire gear and headed down to Ventura. As I got closer to Ventura, you can see the glow from the Thomas Fire.
The Thomas Fire, as it would be later called, named after Thomas Aquinas College in Ventura County. The fire started as a small brush fire, but then accelerated into a full-on wildfire, spreading quickly through the rugged mountain terrain due to the strong Santa Ana winds.
These are very hot, dry winds that come down from the Santa Ana Mountains into the coastal parts of Southern California. Very low humidities, literally giving ideal conditions for forest fire conditions. That if forest fires develop, these Santa Ana winds can flame them up, can intensify them, make them even more powerful.
The 101's right on the coast, and it sort of turns, and you can see more Ventura, and I can see the glow from the fire a couple miles away. All of downtown Ventura had been evacuated. The fire was 2 blocks from down Main Street. There was a lot of destruction. There was a lot of houses on fire, apartment complexes were on fire, and there was a lot of fire trucks. I look for people trying to get out. I look for firefighters fighting the fire. The smoke is a huge factor when you're out covering a fire. I mean, if you don't have goggles, you don't have a mask, it can get really difficult to breathe. There's a lot of smoke. So it's physically draining. I was covered in soot all over my face, my hands, my camera gear gets pretty beat up sometimes. There was an elderly couple.
Hey, you okay?
And they were telling me that the home was over 100 years old and they've owned it their entire life and just passed it down to their daughter and her family. And the woman was just devastated. I mean, that's all I could do, photograph it and tell her story. Being able to tell those stories is important. Without photojournalists or videographers, there aren't fundraisers, there aren't people to help without the knowledge.
These are downslope winds. These winds can accelerate as they come down. They're warm winds, compressed as they slide down that slope. The other concern we have is an inversion in the atmosphere. A layer of warm air above the ground keeps that air sort of very stable, trapped in the lowest layers, almost ducts the air, funnels that wind down towards those lower elevations. If we've got very dry conditions with respect to the trees and the bushes and shrubs, a lot of fuel potential for the fire, all of these ingredients coming together can lead to a catastrophe.
Some houses, you know, you see the whole house gone, but you see a half a room left with pictures still on the wall. Or you find stuffed animals that have been burnt but aren't completely burnt. And you find half burnt pictures. You know, that part is hard. You know, you see that and what people can lose in an instance from a fire. So seeing this, I mean, it was difficult. It was very difficult. But, you know, trying to separate that and focus on photos and trying to capture what's happening is important as well.
Just over 1 month from when Daniel received that fateful call about the wildfire, the phone rings again.
Hey, what's up? It was about 6 a.m. when I got a call from an editor telling me to get to Montecito as fast as possible. There's been a mudslide.
The wildfire was extinguished a month ago, but it's still wreaking havoc in the California hills. The flames had destroyed plant roots that stabilized the soil, creating the perfect conditions for a mudslide.
So I jumped in the car and tried to drive to Montecito, only to encounter numerous roadblocks and people telling me that I can't drive on the 101 because it's been flooded.
In common practice, we refer to them as mudslides, but it's more than just mud. There's debris, large objects that can get transported, and so a more correct term would be landslide. What's happening in a landslide is that the soil on a hill is being mobilized and it's moving. So the land is actually moving with the water down the hill and then being deposited somewhere else.
I really had no idea what to expect. When I got to the first location, I realized how bad it was. This isn't just a mudslide. I mean, the whole mountain came down.
January 9th, 2018. A savage landslide threatens to swallow the coastal enclave of Montecito, California. 1 month earlier, wind-driven wildfires ravaged the hills, destroying vegetation that held the soil in place and left the slopes vulnerable to landslides.
There was debris everywhere. The entire street, cars, debris, everything was under 2.5 feet, 3 feet of mud. There was people trapped in the hotel. It was surreal because the editor kept telling me to go to a retirement home that was up that street, and I kept telling him, like, I physically cannot go there. So I called the editor. I said, listen, I physically can't go there. The mud is 3 feet deep. I didn't bring any gear for this. And so our conversation was, can you go here? And I kept saying, I physically can't go there.
Daniel, like almost all of the Shock residents in the area, could not fully comprehend what had happened during the early morning hours of January 9th. While residents were sleeping, at approximately 3:30 a.m., half an inch of intense rain fell within a 5-minute period, creating a natural disaster.
That's extremely intense. In most of North America, a very rainy day would be maybe an inch of rain. So to have that amount of water concentrated in such a short period is a very extreme condition.
In addition to the rain, it was the conditions left by the previous month's wildfire that allowed water to flow without barriers.
The fire leaves behind it a thin layer of ash, and that ash is very quickly mobilized, and that then leaves the soil completely exposed. And raindrops, when they hit that bare soil, they can disturb it. It kicks it up almost like a mini bomb, and then redisperses it very smoothly, and this creates a surface crust. So that surface crust prevents water from infiltrating into the soil like it would normally. And instead, it's trapped at the surface, it accumulates, and then becomes overland flow. That small amount of sheet flow, as it moves down, gets bigger and bigger, and as it increases and concentrates, it has a lot of energy, and that allows it to pick up and displace progressively larger objects as it moves down the hill. In this case, it's not the water that causes the destruction, it's the debris and the material that comes with it.
Materials such as vegetation, cars, houses, and boulders. Daniel not only witnesses the destruction, but needs to document it.
Seeing the size of those rocks were just, I mean, rocks taller than a semi-truck were moved. There's cars that are up to almost to the windows in mud. There was tons of debris from homes, paperwork, beach chairs, anything that's in a person's home. I climbed through the mud, tried to get to different areas to take different shots. My boots and my pants are 1.5 feet deep in the mud, socks soaking wet. As I was climbing through mud and trying to get better angles to get shots, my phone's going off, directing me different ways, trying to go to different areas. At one point, there was a car floating down the 101 in debris, so I tried to get there. There was a search and rescue team from Fresno, and so I went with them, searching cars, poking holes, trying to find bodies or survivors. I was so focused on trying to get photos and trying to figure out where to go that I didn't have time to think about my own safety. Hiking through the mud and seeing some of these houses, it really was surreal. To see a 2-story house that had moved 50 feet from where the foundation was is unreal. Seeing houses covered in mud up to the 2nd story and watching search and rescue teams go in is hard to watch, and it's emotionally draining. You're trying to piece it together and like how an event like this can really happen, and within an instance.
The Thomas Fire destroyed 1,063 buildings, over 281,000 acres of vegetation, and caused 2 fatalities. Its aftermath led the way for the Montecito mudslide, which leveled 65 homes and killed 21 residents.
It's surreal to see how weather can change in that short amount of time. It was heartbreaking to know that some of these people were not in an evacuation zone, were not warned. Nobody saw the scale of this happening. And to see that in my own backyard, I mean, to see in my neighborhood, it really hits home. Separating myself from that is difficult, but I'm there to do a job and I'm there to tell their story. I tried my best to show the sheer destruction, the emotion, the loss, to tell that story, to tell that this weather-related incident is powerful, and to hopefully share with the world that this can happen to anyone.